Sound speed.
There we go. And we are live. Hello,
Hello,
everyone.
hello.
Hi.
How's everyone doing? Doing well?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Good.
Feel free to sort of give a shout in the chat, as we have been already. I've been commenting in that as well. Cool. Looking forward to week 2 of this season. This week, we're going to be kind of continuing on from where we were talking about themes and suites last week. And the focus is, as it says up in the title, setting music to picture. So what we've got today is we're going to kind of show, mostly looking at Hedwig's theme just as an example, and kind of talking through how it's been adapted in a couple different scenes and kind of talking about how it essentially gets arranged. Because if we look at the overview, that's kind of where, this theme was written ahead of time to sort of establish that language, and then now it's being used in context to, kind of give that particular point of view it's trying to express. So I'll let Sam kind of take it away. Oh, before I do, also just to say in the chat, kind of as we get rolling through this, feel free to drop some of your favorite examples of where you can think of kind of a favorite character theme and then a scene where it's used really effectively. And I can try to kind of look that up and see if we can sort of analyze that together on the stream. Sam,
Thanks,
give it to you.
I was just to while I add to what you just said there. It'd be really good to get some like dramatic examples, sort of TV drama even that really strongly relate to the film that we've given you as well. That would be really helpful. But yeah, going to something a bit bigger, Hedwig's theme. So what we're doing today, we'd initially thought we might look at this theme across all of the films, but we thought that wouldn't be as focused or useful to everyone. In the the film's got its own kind of context, and we just wanted to talk about how that theme is adapted throughout the first film, which was an interesting bit of discovery for me and for the others, that it, unlike a lot of other themes, it isn't super specific. I don't know what you guys are sort of thinking about this, but it's basically plastered on the first film everywhere. Certainly the first, the theme everybody knows for this reason, is everywhere, and trying to sort of retrospectively decide what it represents is quite difficult. And we've kind of we think it's just a sort of a general magical feeling a lot of the time, but more than just this A theme, which we'll actually put up on the screen for you in a second. There's these other component parts to Hedwig's theme as you hear it on the soundtrack album, which are used in different contexts and and arranged in different ways. So we'll try and cover a bit of that today. Mike, is it worth? I mean, I've thought of these chronologically. Shall we just do that in terms of the story? It might be a good way to go through them. If we start
Sure.
with
So
arrival of baby Harry.
Sure.
So,
should I show the sort of score yet, or?
Yeah, just show the A theme.
Cool. I'll swap this over. Look how slick this is, guys. We are
super slick.
Moving up in our streaming production. So, I mean, most people know this theme, but so here it is just to kind of lay it out. So Sam, should I play some along with this?
Well, just before we do, just you know what? Yeah, let's get straight into it. Go from just before 1 minute, and then I think we can probably let it play to the end of the track.
Cool. And Sam, maybe just give us a little context to what this scene is.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, the film starts with the kind of prologue of mysterious wizard Dumbledore appearing and receiving delivery of baby child Harry from large giant Hagrid, and has conversation with Professor McGonagall, and it's our first exposure to magic. It opens with the scene of a very bog standard housing estate, Muggle housing estate, and then suddenly there's a wizard, and it's that kind of exposure to magic. So that's kind of this usage of the theme. Let's hear it.
Cool. Here is the arrival of baby Harry. Cool. Kind of play up to there.
Okay. Well, you're gonna have to play from there in a second as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it was just before another one. So the most obvious part of that was the on horn version of the theme.
Yeah,
Why was it
let's see
used there, guys?
No.
I don't know. So I can't
think
remember
possibly
exactly.
to
Sorry, go on, Jake.
symbolize the grandness and the importance of this character that you're being introduced to. This isn't just some baby.
Mhm.
Yes, I think you've kind of hit it there. For me, it's not Hedwig's theme at all. It's far more Harry's theme than anything, but it is also a general awesome magic theme.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of John Williams being John Williams with kind of incidental music here of magical sounding things, like when Dumbledore's flicking out all the lights with his
Deluminator.
Deluminator. Thank you.
What I'd also
Nerds!
sort of comment on this is, so in this section, kind of, there, we're not showing video clips just because YouTube doesn't like it if we use other copyrighted material, but kind of, if you imagine sort of writing a scene like this, what you're trying to, how you're trying to kind of ebb and flow through this, and the role that the music needs to take on. There's a moment where he's able to kind of play the theme, and that's where the music can kind of step forward for a moment and sort of announce itself. And then all the bit where he just has sort of rising chromatic chords is a little bit more following to picture. So there's something else happening on screen that is drawing our attention to it. So just thinking in kind of the general arrangement of what this cue is, he's using the theme to, in a moment where it's like, here's a moment I can stand up with music and make a statement, and then let me back off and sort of play, a more supporting role. And then I'm sure what we're about to listen to is another moment to kind of step up again.
I think something important to note is that I think there's a tendency to want to retroactively apply meaning on to where he specifically uses that theme. But I think you can think of it in the way that an overture functions in terms of like a musical or an opera, and that some way this may be subconsciously, putting us in this world, picking the color palette, letting us hear it, and then having that theme be in the back of our minds, setting us up for the context in the film. Because that he probably didn't score the scene first. He'd already written the full theme out, knew what it was going to be, and then just thought, well, we need a little bit of it here to introduce us.
I was gonna say the way you establish themes is by repetition. Obviously, the more you hear it, the more the melody will stick, if it's a good melody, obviously. So I think we're so early on in the film that anyway it doesn't have a very strong I think narrative connotation yet, but I feel that as a composer I try to do this myself. When you have a chance to start establishing a theme already and start giving it a context, like the magical world, as Sam was saying, this is, if anything, probably is the Harry Potter world's sort of recurring theme. So that's like, this is the perfect occasion to start kind of putting this little bug into the listeners' ear, even if there's no specific sort of narrative function or callback function to.
Well,
to
that goes more than just the melody as well. Like he's setting up a kind of a timbral, a tone world as well. You know, we
Yeah.
were talking about the use of Celeste as well last week, which we're about to hear. You know, in its closest form to the opening on the soundtrack. You know, his use of instrumentation. This is the first thing we hear. It's the first time we see magic, so it really establishes that this means magic when you hear this stuff.
And it's important to establish that you got the sort of ghostly choir as well, which appears numerous times throughout, like in the Green Guts or Voldemort's theme at the end. It's really, really nice, just setting up, you know, this is what this world is going to be. And I think it does so in a very effective way, because you also notice that harmonically, I mean, the only sort of clear cut harmony there is really when the theme appears. Whereas the rest of it is it's not atonal, it's just not tonal centric. It moves all over the place. Exactly, very ambiguous. He does, I mean, he does that with a lot of his stuff as well. You know, even if it's a diatonic theme, it's often harmonically ambiguous underneath, or there's a funky, weird harmony, especially bass note. And that's really effective in the context of this opening cue, just because it feels very mysterious and uncertain, just because it's not very settled.
Yeah, well, this is an important point as well. I think Mike was talking about it earlier as well, that the melody serves a purpose, but the thing that John Williams is so good at, and not many composers get away with it like he does, but when the melody isn't doing something, the rest of the music is still serving a purpose, and he seems to be able to put movement and complexity into it. You know, the Deluminator moment are those rising, I think, diminished chords or something. In the strings, and it's an immediate magical quality. There's movement in there. A lot of other, you know, composers would have done something totally differently, but it's always serving a purpose. And I think it's maybe not necessarily to the degree of John Williams in a big Hollywood film, but paying attention to what the transitions are doing between important moments is really important. I think now's a good time. Maybe just go back a little bit from where you stopped, Mike, and then just play through, and we'll hear the sort of next version of it.
Sure. I'll pull that theme up again, just so we can kind of see what we're looking out for.
Yeah.
Oops. There we go. Get ahead of ourselves.
Anyway, but and that usage just there is
the title sequence, isn't it?
How it was then used in every other film as the logo. So to me, that sort of screams, it means kind of, this is Harry Potter's world, I guess. Even though there's another track called Harry's Wondrous World. Ignore that. Right, next one. Let's do the next one. Shall we do the next clip, Mike?
Sure, just give us a little context.
Visit to the Zoo. So this one is a little bit of Harry's, just to show Harry's rubbish Muggle world and how he's mistreated by his aunt and uncle and cousin, and he gets to go to the zoo for his cousin's birthday and makes magic happen without realizing it. And so there's a little bit of magical themes and music going on, but not the A theme. Mike, do you want to just put up the C theme, if I remember rightly?
If I remember rightly, this sequence also has the bassoon playing the C melody as well.
You might be right. So this is the one that so this is again is an interesting sort of contrast of use here. It's used in a very different context to, for instance, how it's called in the concert suite. This theme has its own kind of designation of being Nimbus 2000, so it represents Quidditch.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's not used at all in the Quidditch match,
It really
And-
should be used as Neville's theme, because the theme
Yes,
appears
yeah.
when Neville flies off, and he's actually not riding a Nimbus 2000. So
But I
Um,
guess, yeah, something to do with broomsticks and other
Yeah.
things. But anyway, it's used as a kind of almost comedy, I guess.
yeah, well, I think real quick, it's an important thing to note that it almost seems like when he applied these titles, it was based on referencing the book and what those themes would represent. Because obviously, Quidditch in the book, one of the central aspects is Harry receiving his broomstick as Nimbus 2000, and obviously Harry's tie with the magical world. One of the things is Hedwig. That all these different names don't really seem to apply to the film itself, but more to the literary aspect.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, shall we hear? How long's the track, Mike? Can we get away with playing the whole thing?
It's like 3.5 minutes.
Okay, play from 30 seconds and then.
Oh, we're
you
not
can-
hear the tasty oboe solo at the beginning.
We've got to be concise.
Okay.
Okay, here's Visit to the Zoo and Letters from Hogwarts,
Ah,
as
yes.
the track is on the album.
There's a lot to get through.
Yeah. Well,
But-
I kind of let it play a little bit there because what I found was interesting is actually once the A theme comes in again, the orchestration is almost identical to the actual suite. So that is pretty much just lifted and then slightly rearranged where once the horn comes in, it's a softer, more chamber sound. So
Yeah.
then he starts to kind of adapt it to the picture, but it's sort of directly lifted, and also kind of as this is in the very beginning of the series, I think it's helpful to kind of establish that vocabulary once more.
But it's also, it is also rearranged really cleverly. All much of what we listened to was taken from the themes that you're showing. The da 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 da.
Mhm.
Bum, 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 bum is
Yeah,
all
it's very-
it's all taken.
It's very clever developing and
I'll add a kind of question just generally and sort of to the chat. I guess what do you guys think as far as and it's hard to sort of like, try to get inside John Williams' mind, but I think it's fairly easy to imagine, sort of why and how you'd rearrange this. So, maybe feel free to share some comments on kind of how you think some of those variations were done. He starts much more clearly with something much closer to the original, but then starts to kind of change up the rhythm a little bit, and it becomes a little bit more sort of bespoke. And what do you guys think about that?
Well, even in what we just listened to, I thought there was quite a nice thing in the second statement of the C theme, where Michael was dancing along, pointing out the bassoon, there's
which
a
only
very fast.
were privy to see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nobody
only
else,
we
nobody
got to
else
see
saw
that.
that. Nobody else
That was
needed
for
to see
our
that.
eyes only. Yeah. Well, during that moment, the violin was playing the fast, frenetic, sometimes sometimes diatonic and chromatic runs. That idea, that kind of motif, has its own identity from the A theme, at least as we heard it in the suite. And so that's just taking a little idea. It's almost a character in the piece, a fast violin run, and applying it to another musical context within the same theme. So I think that's very good reuse of ideas, which is not necessarily a bad thing. In this case, it kind of ties them together, and I'm sure it functioned visually. I'm sure there was something crazy going on in the zoo, or the letters flying in the postbox. I can't quite remember, but that's such a good idea, and it has such a character that it's applicable to many different situations. And here's an example of applying it to a different situation and a different musical context.
Well, that's the thing, is that in the context of Harry Potter, especially the first film, it feels like the themes don't represent things as much as the actual orchestration does. It's almost like the orchestration has more of a motivic identity than any of the specific themes, because you don't really see the themes match up to specific things where you're saying, oh, that's exactly what that's meant to represent. But you will hear, as Shane just said, these different orchestral colors and stylings that will absolutely reflect what you're supposed to feel, whether it's majesty, whether it's sort of frenetic energy, whether or not it's just outright grandeur, lots of different things. But that's honestly why I feel like the orchestration is the more important aspect in the context of this film than the specific themes are. It's just interesting because the themes themselves don't really develop all that much. The orchestration develops around them, but for the most part, the themes don't change fundamentally to a great degree.
I think.
Can I just butt in with a quick technical thing? Shane, your microphone is sort of crackly a little bit. So I'm not sure, just something to check on your end.
Well, I may have to join the call. I'll do that.
Cool. Yeah, we can kind of live with it if it, because everybody can still hear you. But
I was just going to say on what Michael was talking about there, that just in the context of the of the film, we've got two different things here. We've got Harry not knowing what's going on in the Muggle world, but there's magic happening. And there's a very subtle orchestrational difference there. It feels a little bit more mischievous and a bit more grounded. And then when you hear the more full-blown, closer to Hedwig's theme on the album, that's when they're being bombarded with owls and letters coming down the chimney and stuff. So to sort of spoil the illusion, that's what John Williams was writing in the end, was how it was used in the trailer, is because that kind of represented the start of the story. Is Harry getting his letter, and I think that's why it was a bit more fully formed for those moments. But yeah, I think it just shows, doesn't it, that it's just a bit of subtle adaptation can really fit the context.
Absolutely.
Well. So just bring up a couple sort of comments we've had in the chat. So Darren's bringing up kind of how, so I'll just read off sort of what you've put. A similar variation we heard in Chamber of Secrets. Gilderoy Lockhart's theme is very similar to Hedwig's theme. And this is something you guys have brought up before. And also I noticed Jolene also brought up, which we can look at maybe a little bit later, so the opening to the first How to Train Your Dragon film, which is something we actually considered using for this episode. And talking through it, so that there's a lot of kind of interesting stuff to chat about.
Real quick, just on Darren's comment real quick, the Gilderoy Lockhart theme is a really interesting one, because it absolutely is the variation of Hedwig's theme. But if you want to hear something that's even more similar to Gilderoy Lockhart's theme than Hedwig's theme, it's actually a cue from Indiana Jones 3 called No Tickets. Basically the exact same piece of music. So listen to that.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, it's when Indiana and his father are on the airship, and they're coming around checking tickets, and he throws the Nazi out of the window. Exactly. It's basically the exact same piece of music. So worth a listen.
I didn't know this. I'm gonna
Darren gave us a link to that as well that I might be able to play. I could play the audio from.
Unbelievable.
Do you think that's worth listening to?
Yeah, figure it.
Yeah. If you pull it up, it's No Ticket, I think, is the cue.
Just while you're doing that, Mike, on the How to Train Your Dragon thing, Michael was talking about overtures, and that first scene, Out of Journey Dragon, that is an overture, basically, isn't it?
Yep, that's
it.
Yeah, that was that sounded right.
Darren, which maybe where should I play from? From the beginning?
Play from the beginning. So
Okay.
Darren, the cue is called No Ticket.
No, this is the oh yeah. If you're looking for that, so this is the Gilderoy Lockhart theme.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Cool.
similar elements there for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, moving on, shall we?
Mhm.
I think just in the interest of time, let's. Oh, you've got to play the Journey to Hogwarts one. Yeah. So next one, Mike. Platform 9 3/4, Journey to Hogwarts. Yeah, go from a minute because I can't remember exactly where the Hogwarts castle reveal is, but that's pretty.
Which is what a tasty moment. I remember watching that in the theater for the first time.
Choir time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
1 second.
Someone.
I get there's like a lot of versions of something like this on Spotify.
Oh right.
And let me just pull up your and Journey to Hogwarts.
Beautiful link provided.
Don't pull up one of those bad MIDI renderings that people upload.
Well, exactly. I have that, or there's like a version that Imogen Heap did, and
yeah.
Well, just to remind us, which theme are we going to be listening out for?
This is
game?
very much the A part of Edric's theme. Again, just
no punches
just
pulled.
Cause, yeah.
Well, it's also the B theme as well, isn't it? With the on the horns, the da da da.
Well, it's actually there's a little bit of that as an intro. I think you hear just before it cuts to the castle. Dee da dee da dee da, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah, I know, it's great.
So I've got this now. Sam, is there a score reduction that we should be looking at specifically?
Nothing we've not already seen. But if you want to put the
we haven't seen the B theme though. That's what this is. This is what is going to be playing.
Cool.
We've not looked at that one yet.
Okay.
I'll pull that up, and here we go. From about a minute in, this is the Platform in 9 3/4 and Journey to Hogwarts.
See, the interesting thing there is it doesn't exactly line up to the B theme because it's basically the first 4 bars of the B theme, and then it drops down to a transposition of the last 2 bars of the remainder. So there's a slight change in and of itself.
Yeah,
but anyway, I think even without watching the pictures of this, you can kind of hear where he's just sort of will hold and kind of extend part of that theme and then continue playing it, and it feels very seamless. And while he's also kind of changed key in the middle of that, but it's again kind of like having the opportunity to step up to the forefront with the music and then hide and play a supporting role for 10 seconds and then come forward again. So I think that's really I mean, he does it very masterfully, but this is something just to notice in the actual construction of the cue, kind of how you're arranging a theme into the cue itself, kind of understanding that relationship. And this is a great example of where he does that.
I think it's also important to notice, sorry Sam, is that the way that he's able to do that, though, just because I think very few people can do it so convincingly, is that he has a very active and intentional role for his underscore, whereas a lot of themes you hear, the underscore is just supporting what the theme is doing, whereas it's almost like the theme is independent of what's going on in the orchestra underneath, and he just happens to lay it on top. Whereas if you took away the theme, it would still be just as engaging, just because the orchestration and construction of everything underneath there, harmonically, timbrally, just sounds so good. So I think that's an important aspect as well, is to not overinvest in just the what the theme is doing, but what everything underneath is doing to allow that theme to resonate at the moments it needs to shine.
Well, connecting there from what you both said is about that transition. It's a it's such a clever transition because he's orchestrationally and melodically, because there's that clear moment, and it's as important a moment as you get in Harry Potter, where the first time he sees Hogwarts, right? It's a magical thing, and excuse the pun, and so that's when he really opens out orchestrationally. Before that, it's been a little bit more not subdued, but not in your face, and then he's bringing out the sections that only get used at moments like that, brass and full brass, I should say, and choir. That tells you that means pay attention, and I think it makes for a really special thing. But it's not like the thing that he does so well is that it's the transition to that. It's not like bam, there's your brass. You don't feel that. You just it's just there. And
well, it's not clean and separate. You can't sort of break them apart very easily. It's just one seamless sort of flowing musical river from one section to the next. There's not really any disconnects.
I like what Lara said in the comments about it's immensely fast transition without any sacrifice. And I think part of that comes from, it's also kind of what Michael was saying about like having a very active role. And so I think if you could kind of compare that to something like, it made me think of, sort of by contrast, like Thomas Newman's music is also very malleable. And often because he kind of, part of his sound is this pan-diatonicism, where he can kind of have equal weight in a given key and be able to move very easily. But it's also kind of intentionally playing something that's a little more in the background, where this is harder to do in a lot of ways, because it is very intentionally playing in a subdued role, and then it comes forward. It's a lot more sort of theatrical, I think, in that role.
I think the difference there, just with Thomas Newman as an example, is that what they both, like all composers, I guess, but they're writing in blocks vertically. John Williams, if you look at our favorite How Leonard Scores, you can see the blocks of orchestration perfectly. It's so clear, and but he's doing that with a symphonic orchestra. That they are his building blocks. Thomas Newman just does it with different blocks. Mm-hmm. He starts the process with soloists, and that's why he has that very unique sound. And that's his building blocks. And he will, if he needs a stronger force or a larger force, he will employ the orchestra in whatever capacity. But that's it's just a different way of using those building blocks.
I think John Williams is sort of doing musical dovetailing in a lot of the ways that he functions, just because it's the seamless transition. You can see it sort of shift on the page, because you'll see almost sort of a visual representation of what the music's doing due to how dense it is or how sparse it is. You can see things being added as more notes fill up the page, and it's a very effective technique that I think nowadays there's not a lot of people that really do as gradual yet at the same time as sudden of a shift. He does sudden shifts, but they're not jarring due to the way that he weaves the music in and out of certain instruments.
It's because people these days do, this is very simplistic, but they do, this is your string block, piano to forte crescendo.
Mm-hmm.
Here's your brass block, piano to forte crescendo. Here's your winds block, piano to, what John Williams is doing is this.
Yeah,
What you're talking about is far more elegant than just section by section. Yeah, I mean, that's a very simplistic way.
It's like the difference in orchestration between like Monteverdi versus Tchaikovsky, or something, which is like very, very basic. Like, okay, this is a texture that serves a role versus something that is very colorful and like intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you notice that in a lot of John Williams music, that like. I've played a bunch of it in orchestra as a double bassist, and you find like in one moment you're part of the string section kind of serving one role, then you are like with the tubas doing another role, and especially if you look at like Warhorse, you're sort of jumping all over the place, and so that's really interconnected orchestration. But yeah, I think it's I guess just also, I didn't mean to, imply that Thomas Newman's way is lesser than. They're just completely different. I think more important, the point is to understand that approach. So are you trying to have a very active role where you're trying very active underscore and then coming forward? If so, then you most times need to kind of maintain that. Versus if you're playing your music in a slightly more subdued role, that can sort of jump out at a couple moments here and there and be more sort of homogenous from section to section, then that's a different approach. And, you kind of need to stay within a particular identity.
And a lot of the time that decision will come to you from the film. The film will tell you which approach is better, or the filmmaker will tell you which approach they prefer. I just wanted to say something quick that I thought was interesting from what Michael said earlier about how with this particular cue, we were able to hear the depths of the different layers of the music, and I think that's one of the great benefits of the detailed nature of John Williams's music, is he can have moments where it's just the accompaniment and it's incredibly musically interesting without the melody, so it can stand on its own. But it also means that because it's written in that intricate way, you could, if you needed to, in a particular cue, take just what the woodwinds are doing there, and that forms the basis of a cue, but within itself it is musically interesting and it kind of stands up on its own. And then you could say, actually, this cue will base it on just the brass part of that sequence. So you have all of these layers and all of these combinations that you can throw together in different forms, and because rather than just having a melody and a chordal accompaniment. If you take the melody away, the chordal accompaniment just falls over and it's not interesting music anymore. But this is not that. It's every different element is interesting on its own or interesting in combination. And I think you do see that sometimes, and it's a huge benefit of writing interesting music, is that you can do a lot more with it. It gives you so many options and so many capabilities. Doesn't mean it's right for every type of score or every type of cue, but especially in this, it's really beneficial. I think that's also what we see with How to Train Your Dragon that someone else brought up earlier. It has a similar kind of thing.
I think sorry guys, I was just going to say, Shane, I think you're so right there, and I think that the reason John Williams is able to do that is because there's a complexity to it that each has a distinct character in and of itself. But I think what we can take from that is, in a smaller context, with a short film, if you've written a fleshed out piece of music to accompany a film, I don't think you should sort of deem this thing a failure if you take the melody out and it doesn't work. But the trick is being clever and recognizing what elements of this are sort of can be directly associated, are recognizable, and can be used. You know, you need to be able to adapt to underscore. You need to be able to adapt to music bed. I hate that word, but you know, to really be underneath something else, you need to, but it still needs music. So you know, you need to find an element of what you've written that takes you there really easily, even if it's non-melodic. And you know, that I think that's still an important thing to get hold of, and to plan as well. You know, we're in the sort of macro process now. We're in the part where you're putting it to picture. You've already written your theme, so you can now plan with your cue sheet. You can spot the film and say, right, this element of that theme can go there. That would work really well there, but it might not be a melodic element. It might just be
well,
certain
sort of
sound.
going back to what we were talking about last week in regards to also where we're writing, I think this is sort of leaning towards the benefit of writing away from picture as well, because you get the opportunity to think about things. Obviously, doing both is the ideal situation, but you know, like maybe this is overstepping for me to say, but I don't think, you know, if John Williams were writing to a sequencer, he wouldn't be writing the same score that he did. That comes from dedicated thought away from the film, because you know, he does the old school thing of watching the film, goes away and writes, comes back, checks, and I think that space allows him to really engage with what he's doing musically. Of course, it's not going to be perfectly matched or locked picture. It's not going to be Mickey Mousing, but at the same time, what he does is not trying to be that way. So I think obviously that's one extreme compared to another, but having that space and that distance to really think about the music, as Sam said, you know, if you were trying to remove the melody and say, is this engaging enough on its own? I think it's important to be able to separate it from the film, because then if it's musically engaging away from the picture, you know, it's going to work really effectively once you put it back in, as long as it matches up mood wise.
Yeah, one thing as well, Michael, on that the method that John Williams uses, which I don't know how close it is to how he used to, but literally watching the film through a moviola and whacking bar lines on an orchestral sheet of paper and then going away and writing at a piano. What the skill that is so impressive with that is the sense of pulse, in that he can watch a scene and know exactly the energy the music should have at any given time, and he doesn't even have to be watching the film while he's writing it. It's so fixed in his mind. And that's even though we might be writing in sequences for the most part, it's really important to have that instinct when you're doing it, and don't rely on the grid lines in front of you. Like, establish it before you put any music down, you know, even if it's just like improvising to the film and just getting a feel for what the energy is like. It's really important for that to dictate how you arrange your material. I think is a really good starting point that John Williams is like the master at doing.
Yeah, and anytime I write a cue and I'm already like somewhat through writing it, and I realize I haven't changed the tempo from 120 BPM, I'm like, oh, I've done something wrong here. I started writing before I actually thought about what the pulse of the scene should be.
It's so easily done though, because you've got your, you know, at least I do. You often have your palette in front of you. You just want to start making sounds, and before you know it, it sounds good, but it's telling a different story from what you're seeing.
Well, that's
guys,
that's
sorry,
the only sort of.
I just want to kind of bring it back into the chat a little bit and start to push forward, because I think we can very easily sort of go off on this and talk about different methods and techniques. But I thought Darren brought up a good point about, which is something we also talked about before the stream, which is like, what about after the third film? How this theme is then used and adapted by other composers. And I know Sam has very strong feelings on this, but so maybe give kind of a quick commentary on that, on how you think then this theme is taken so seriously.
The disclaimer here is that we don't know the pressures they had from the studio. What I don't know is why, you know, John Williams had a glossary, as he would put it, of themes from the first 3 films that had very clear connections throughout the series. You know, if it were a TV show, assuming the composer was going throughout the whole series, those themes would have been used to represent certain things throughout. Now, Hedwig's theme, because of its loose association, was, I think, misused later on. It's like you have to use this somewhere, so just make sure you use it. But then other composers put their own stamp on it, and there's obviously arguments for that being a very positive thing, which it is. But essentially, as far as I can tell, it was used for the logo or for random moments of transition moments. It was used for changes of scene where now we're going to the magical world, and that was it. But
the music here is saying you're still watching Harry Potter, and here's another scene.
Exactly. But don't you think that's such a shame? I mean, it's an amazing theme. To be honest, I'm less. This is my anger at Hedwig's theme is not actually at just Hedwig's theme. It's all the other themes that could.
It's the Voldemort theme especially as well. You know, keep in mind, like I love Patrick Doyle. You know, he is my homeboy. But the problem is that, you know, like the fourth score was good. It was really good. But the problem is, because it wasn't using these glossary of themes, as you put it, Sam, like the Voldemort theme is so menacing and so spine chilling. Like when you see it in context in the first film, it's just so good. And to lose that sort of musical integrity that's already so ingrained in the film franchise, I think was a really missed opportunity to be able to use that, because it sort of felt like, as the films went on, without ragging too much on them, they seemed to lose their identity as individual you know, offerings. They felt more homogenized into the style of filmmaking that was going on at that time. They felt more Twilightized. And I mean, to be honest, it was almost jarring at the end of the seventh film when the reunion of friends cue from Chamber of Secrets came on as the train was pulling away. I'm like, oh, right, I remember this. This is what it's supposed to feel like. But it felt like it really strayed far to its detriment, based on what was offered up in the first and second and even third films. Because the third film as well got very dark, yet maintained the magical aspect of the first two. It matured, and then it went a completely opposite direction. Again, you don't know what the pressures of the studio were, and you know, if they were encouraged to go in a different direction with a different director, but it just felt like something was missed there.
Just whack it on vibraphone and it's a different film.
Yeah.
But that film's great. But Mike, do we have time? Because Michael was talking about Voldemort's theme. Our last example is from that scene. Do we have time to just listen to that quickly?
Yeah, I think, and just, I mean, we can go a little over tonight, but I would also like to kind of cover a little bit about How to Train Your Dragon and talk about some other examples. So let's just kind of be a little conscious of that, and we can kind of try to get through that. Because what we'd also like to do tonight is start to look through the film that we're sort of doing for the overall, you know, this kind of project for the season. And give kind of a brief chat through that, so that we can start to sort of put some of the things we've been talking about in context.
Well, in that case, Mike, let's skip the
we can move on.
Let's talk about other things, because I think we've made our points.
I think, yeah, for all there's either Harry Potter fans who are diehard, who are all in, or there might be some people who are maybe missing out on a big part of this.
Yeah.
So with How to Train Your Dragon, I think, I mean, what Jolene brought up before is really, it's got so many different themes kind of nestled in it. And I think this is another, you know, it's sort of like an opposite example of what we've been looking at here, where with Harry Potter, we were trying to think of what's a very sort of simple, identifiable theme that we can then be able to pick out in different examples and say, okay, that is there and it represents this. So the other end of that is, what about when you're doing kind of a gigantic overture and you're nesting in all of this material that in the beginning doesn't have that context yet? It becomes sort of greater by the context that comes later. You know, so once we then know what these represent, it sort of makes you think back to when you heard it before. And think, oh, wow, you know, now you see through this. It's like they were foreshadowing all this and laying all this groundwork.
Yeah, although you think about the opening to How to Train Your Dragon, it's not nearly as subtle as the John Williams stuff. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I just mean that it's a very obvious representation of what the themes are. When Astrid appears, the big explosion behind her, it's Astrid's theme. When the dragons appear, it's the Berk theme. It's very upfront and in your face, intentionally so, just because the nature of the film lends itself to being, sort of over the top, especially over the top musically, just because this whole opening scene is basically a prologue and an introduction to a very action-packed sequence. It makes sense that the music should sort of be up in your face, not sort of cleverly interwoven yet. You get these big themes presented, boom, boom, boom at the beginning, and then it's like, then it starts over again. And then as the film progresses from that point, after that initial scene, you see the very sort of clever winding of one theme into the next.
It's literally like the director telling the composer, these are the themes we need. In that first scene, these are the important things in the film that will need themes. And so that's how he's had to write it. He's had to be one theme after the other. So we don't get that subtlety of transition because there just isn't time. I mean, we do get that subtlety, but there's not as much space for like incidental music in between.
Yeah.
So masterfully crafted though, that to take
amazing.
us through all of those different worlds so quickly and each of them to have such a strong identity. It's
incredible.
Really nice. Yeah.
He's my hero.
This is from the track This Is Berk. And I guess because there's a little bit of kind of an intro before we get into where sort of the rest of it is. So I think maybe I'll play from like a minute in.
So you're going to skip the bassoon moment again.
Shame.
And yeah, I mean, Jolene also mentioned on this, said, I find it quite interesting that Toothless's theme doesn't actually appear in the beginning. It doesn't appear until they actually become friends, which is quite interesting because that is sort of such a significant moment where it turns Toothless into a character. Because before that, it was sort of like this unknown enemy, but then it turns Toothless into a main character.
Well, that's because at the beginning he's regarded as one of the other dragons, and so he gets lumped. The music is threat, and I think that's not what his theme represents later on. It's more about the relationship between the two, and so
it makes sense to kind of delay that, because if you were to play it, you'd be sort of alluding to it too soon. You'd be kind of giving away that this one is different or has more significance. Cool. I'll play this from like about a minute in or so. We'll see where that is.
Gonna mute because I'll be singing.
the end.
I know. I know what I'm gonna watch tonight before I go to sleep.
What I was just thinking about that made me laugh is it because we're playing other music, the sort of algorithms of Twitch and YouTube automatically will mute these kind of after the stream, like those specific sections. And then we sort of, make a claim against it to show that this is fair use. If somebody actually has to review these, they're just watching Sam like play all the air instruments. They're like, what are they doing in this
We're
section?
trying to make it so that if it stays muted, people still know what's going on because they can just, oh, I see Sam. There's a piece going.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll know exactly what piece it is just from my miming.
Oh.
Oh, it's so good, guys.
Oh,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And what's cool about that sequence as well that doesn't happen so often is that all of the themes are kind of presented almost in their most idealized form. Like the brass is huge, the choirs, the male voice choirs are huge. Everything is so full. There's like,
Yeah.
this is the music.
Astrid's
guys. Like,
theme is like comically
yeah, Astrid's
over
theme
the
is like
top.
ridiculous, like it's almost a parody of itself, but like
But
it's so good.
The scene is a parody at that moment.
Yeah.
It's all slow-mo and she's just twizzling
Oh,
her hair in
that's
front of an
true.
explosion. So it's
Yeah.
perfect.
That's true.
Yeah,
but-
it is perfect.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
But it's an interesting thing to actually get that opportunity to play the theme in its fullness. You don't often hear that.
As well, and it's all under dialogue as well. Like he's talking throughout the whole scene, pretty much. Or it's voiceover at first, I think, and then there's a lot of dialogue between characters after that, while they're fighting dragons, and it's.
Well, that's sort of what I was
it's
saying at the
very smart.
beginning is that, in the context of animation is really the only chance you really get to be that sort of on the nose, that up front, and that in your face, just because it in and of itself, it's supposed to be a fun movie. It's supposed to be funny. And it's just a larger than life, opening scene as well. So, yeah, I mean, you see that with the trend in a lot of other animated movies as well that are much larger and much more orchestral, whereas live action, you just don't get the opportunity as much.
Yeah.
It can
And I think-
sometimes come off as maybe a little insincere or comical or something if you give something too much weight. It makes me think of, and this is a bit of an off-topic thing, but like the difference between actors when they're performing on a play, in a play on a stage versus in a film. Like a gesture on stage has to be pretty big for people in the audience to see it. But when you've got an ultra close up on someone's eye and they like blink, that can be more than the biggest gesture on stage. So maybe the reason I bring that up is that in a film, if you do too large a gesture, it can make it feel like it doesn't match with the acting.
But I
So
think that's
maybe
important-
actually
that's-
relating back to what we were going to talk about in relation to the small film, because as shorter films, you can't have these big gestures like that. You couldn't write a piece like this for a 10-minute film unless it were honestly, maybe an animation film, an animation short, you could get away with it, but not as lengthy of an extended sort of in your face section, just because you don't have the time or the luxury of time. So I guess maybe what's a good way of putting this? Using the space you have to move effectively. There's a certain term I'm trying to think of. Can't think of it. Sam, go. I'll think on it.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what I was going to say. And basically, it depends on the story you're telling. And what we can draw from what we've heard today is, for me, they're much bigger films with a lot more going on, a lot more length to work with, with those themes, and also just a size, of the film means you've got that room to write a lot, write big. And when you're dealing with something much smaller, you need to still get the tone right. That's the thing you need to get right. And then, that's kind of what we were talking about last week with getting writing your theme. So when you're, what we heard with Hedwig's theme is the kind of how that theme is adapted to serve certain purposes within the story. That story happens to be a big, magical, everyone sort of loves it kind of thing. When you're dealing with a small indie drama, you need to really hone in on what is the story that needs to be told here and how can music help it. If music isn't going to help this part of the story, don't put it there. These are the kinds of considerations. I guess, Mike, maybe it's Are you wanting to play a bit of it today, or like have a just a quick look at it?
The
Or
film,
the
yeah.
film, yeah.
So,
now's the time.
yeah, I guess just to kind of give another overview of this project that we're sort of doing, offering, suggesting for this season is we've given a form last week. I could maybe find that quickly, or someone else while I explain this, and just throw that into the chat, the Google form, in case you're interested in joining on. So we've got this short film that I scored years ago with my friend Vicky. And Vicky is very talented director, and now she's doing very well directing regular blocks on TV. And this was a film that she did through winning this kind of it's called the Ari Alexa Challenge through Directors UK, where they select somebody. They select a handful of people, give them like a full Ari Alexa kit for 2 days, which is a lot of money, and they get to go shoot a film. So she made this film through that, and Vicky is coming back onto the stream in a couple weeks' time. So we get her to, one, have an episode in 2 weeks where we're going to hear a lot more about kind of her background and how, you know, her sort of journey into directing has been. And then 2 weeks after that, she's actually going to give feedback on these scores. So what we're going to be doing is you can start now. We have the film, fill out the form. I can then send you a link to download the film, and you can have a go at scoring it. And then over the next few weeks, we'll have opportunities, including next week, where if you want to get a start on it, you can show that to us, and we can give you some feedback on it. Next week is specifically kind of an orchestration review. So more generally as well, if you want to, I'll kind of go over this at the end, but if you want to offer up some just other pieces of orchestration, we'll do another one of those. But this film might be a good option as well if you're starting. And also in between the two sessions with Vicky, we'll have a review session specifically for this film. So what we're trying to kind of do with this season is have a more of sort of an overarching plan. I don't want to say curriculum because that's too academic. It's too much of my day job. And so this is more just kind of having more of a flow through this, so that we want to kind of offer as much as we can, you know, with this chance. And I think it's a really unique opportunity to get feedback from the director who made it when you're doing kind of a rescore. That's something you never get. So so we've got this film. Yep.
Sorry, Matt. I was just going to say to add to that. I mean, I think you guys agree. I think we're just really keen to see works in progress here. We want to be a friendly space. And I'm aware that some people are going to be like, I have to get it done and have a finished product. We want to see works in progress so we can follow it through that process. This is what this series is about for us. So please don't hesitate to send stuff over the next couple of weeks as well.
Yeah, even if it's just a theme or a theme idea or something like that, kind of wherever you're at with it, this is sort of what it is. You know, think of it more like, here's just a group of friends and we want to share our work and help each other out with it, not like, you know, you're submitting it for review from the board or anything like that.
Yeah, and Jolene had asked, maybe we haven't sorted out the technical aspect of this. She asked, how do we submit the film after scoring? Have we thought about that?
Yes, it's a great question. I think just how we've done in the past. So maybe just create like a Google G Drive link or something like that, or a Dropbox link, and you can then just submit that in the chat, and then I can open those up and we play it.
Or you can message us during the week, either on our Facebook page or on our email address. We all keep that monitored. So if you want to send us material before the stream, feel free to reach out on any of our channels. And
yeah, you can reach out to any of us directly if you want to, you know, give us that link ahead of time. It's helpful to us as well. If you want to submit a little ahead of time, then we can kind of have a plan for how to go through
If you do submit ahead of time, you'll almost definitely get played.
Yeah.
Because we'll be like, oh, we've got to play such and such. So
yeah.
And we'll have more juicy things to say probably.
Exactly. And I think what else is useful about this little project is it kind of lets people, hopefully it's more kind of group interaction with one another, because if, you know, Jolene sees Darren's entry or Darren sees Jolene's entry, they've both gone through the same process on the same film, and they can learn from from one another more directly than if they were to just both show us two pieces of work that they've done completely separate from one another, because it's harder to compare and contrast and get a sense of the bigger context there. But if we know that we're talking about the same film, the same difficulties that you might be going through, then I find it easier to learn that way personally.
Yeah. So I thought maybe we could just kind of briefly look through it. I'll just sort of pop over so we can see this on the stream. I'm not going to play through the whole film, but just to sort of scrub through different parts and kind of get an idea. I mean, roughly the synopsis. So it's called Pulling, and it's about this girl Sylvie, played by Toto Bruin, who is also a friend of mine that I knew before this film, and then ran into her on set and realized she was the main character. By the way, I'm also an extra in this, along with a previous season guest, Kevin Penkin. We both play extras in this.
Shameless,
film.
Mike. Shameless plug.
So
I'm available for extra work. Just give me an email.
yeah. There's some really great shots of me in the background pretending to do nothing. So by the way, Toto, I mean, just kind of congratulations to her. You might recognize her. She's in this series now called It's a Sin, which just came out on HBO Max, and has had like quite big review. But yeah, Toto is doing really great. So I think, this film is shot really well, looks great. Just a kind of couple technical things about it. So the way that I received it was it already had my suite kind of temped onto it. And it was sort of too difficult to kind of get all the pieces back in order to reconstruct one that was totally clean from the director or the producer. So what I did is I just muted those parts and I put the voiceover in these different sort of subtitles. So at least you know what's going on through the film, but just understand you would also have obviously some kind of background noise and sound effects and dialogue, that kind of thing. So that I think should give enough context to kind of what is going on in the scene to try and score around that. The other sort of technical bit, for a big portion of this film where they're kind of just at this party, there is background music that's playing, and that's intentional to not be scored. So, this was kind of known to me from the beginning with Vicky that I'm going to use some tracks in the back of this, and it's just going to be diegetic music. So it's not something you need to approach or try to kind of redo or something like that. So really the main focus of this will be on kind of maybe the beginning a bit or the ending. Kind of, I mean, you'll know essentially when everything sort of cuts out where there's room for music to come in. And yeah, I guess just synopsis of the film. I mean, you'll sort of get it when you watch it. But it's about Toto's character struggles with, I forget what there's a name of this specific condition where somebody obsessively pulls their hair out.
In Italian, it's called trichotillomania, and I know that because I used to have that.
Which is very helpful translation.
Well, isn't that the English translation as well? I thought it was the same term.
Well, but with an English accent.
Trichotillomania, probably.
Trichotillomania? Okay. Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And Vincenzo, I'm glad you don't do that anymore.
Yeah,
you have beautiful hair.
I have very pretty hair.
So, it's kind of, a lot of this flashback. So I guess just things to kind of consider, it's obviously Toto is her character Sylvie is the main character within this, but it's focused around a lot of this anxiety. Also, I mean, they're drinking at the end of this scene, so they must be 18 years or older in the UK. So kind of, I don't know, around that, probably like think undergraduate. This is probably sort of the age range, so which is probably very relevant for a few of you. So anyway, I think that is, just kind of hopefully gives a helpful kind of overview of what the project is. I don't want to really say too much more because I think you should just have a go. I think you should just, if you're interested, send it out, fill out that form so I can send you the link to the film, and then just go through it, have a go at it, and bring it into these streams. So we'd love to hear your ideas and your work.
Yeah, we don't want to put you in a box and tell you to do this and do that. Let's see what you want to do, what you feel is right, what speaks to you.
Yeah.
So I think just to kind of close out this stream, one, thank you guys again. Thank you for all your support with this. I mean, it really, what I would love to kind of comment on what Shane was just saying before we looked at the film is, I sort of noticed this after last week's stream that I think it becomes really powerful when you guys start connecting as well. And kind of like what I've seen happen in the chat and everybody starting to, I mean, everybody's always been very encouraging, but kind of getting to know your peers within the chat as well. I think that's such a powerful thing. And to see each other's work, comment on each other's work, it really makes it like a bigger community where we can all just help each other. And so, I mean, that's what, we really want this thing to be about. It's kind of why we do this.
Yeah. This is literally why we decided to found.
Yeah.
To score.
We don't make money doing this, there's we don't really care to. The point is that we want to share what we know, what we've learned, and I think it's just really great that it's starting to become a nice community where everybody can just we're kind of all here to learn.
After fanboying over Harry Potter, of course.
Yeah. Just looking ahead to next week. So as I briefly mentioned, next week will be an orchestration review. Feel free to bring anything. It doesn't have to be specific to the film. It could be a good opportunity if you want to look through stuff for the film. Even if you're just sharing a theme idea for the film and it's not fully orchestrated or something like that, share it and we can all share our thoughts together. Or if you want to bring another project in and look at something else, it can be all about that. It will be great to look at some scores if you have them available, or just show us a link to either film clip or just a recording or something. So very open, but next week is just it's an opportunity for another kind of peer review. Cool. Check the schedule on, we've got those out on social media pages, kind of about the other weeks coming up. I think the following week, again, is going to be really exciting getting Vicky on. It's going to be a really unique one with her. There's a lot to learn from Vicky and kind of understanding like the path of a director. Because I think a lot of you are probably working with people in their early stages. And so to hear from somebody who has sort of completed that and is now a regular working professional director and kind of all the things they fought through, all the time that took, I think that will be a really helpful kind of thing to look out for.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other closing thoughts, guys?
No.
Just very heartwarming outpouring of love in the chat. Thanks, guys. And we really appreciate you all.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Then we hope to see you next week.